Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Suchon.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are remaining in San Diego, America's finest city, and we are talking television production, audio production, podcasts, what it's like to work on true crime, maybe someone wrongfully convicted, maybe somebody who scammed people out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, history stories, podcasts. Really excited about this week's episode. Our guest is Rebecca Waer. She attended San Diego State from 1998 through 2001. She is an Emmy-nominated producer and storyteller. It would take a really long time to go through all of her credits, but she has worked on shows that have appeared on Investigative Discovery, National Geographic, Discovery, A&E, HGTV. She's done it all from research to post-production, field production, clearance, and we're glad to have her on this week's podcast. Rebecca, welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So whenever we talk about journalism and different jobs in journalism, it's really fun for me to look at all the different avenues that you can go. And sometimes it's a story for tonight's newscast or tomorrow's newspaper. Sometimes it's short. And then sometimes it's really long. And that's what you've done, is these much longer projects, Rebecca. So let's start with just what do you enjoy about really diving deep on a subject and telling it in a very complex, detailed way?
Well, thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here and to be talking about the subject of journalism with somebody from my alma mater, Go Aztecs. So big projects. You know what I really love is I love being able to have time to tell a story properly. You always feel like you don't have enough time, but I really like long form journalism, or I like longer form projects because it affords the opportunity to get into a little bit more detail than, say, just a few minute long piece on a nightly segment.
How about your entryway to journalism? What was it that got you just interested in the topic of telling stories in journalism? Where did it all begin?
The interest in journalism began when I was very young, actually. I actually always wanted to do something where I was allowed the opportunity to tell stories. I grew up even reading like stories from books. I would record myself reading them on tape. And yeah, I just loved all of that. Like in the fifth grade, we were given the option to do either a science project or a learning project, and I decided to do not that science isn't learning, but a non-science-y project, and I chose the topic, I want to be a DJ. And so I got to go, and I went to KFMB. I was in the fifth grade. I went to KFMB with my friend, and we both learned about how to be a DJ. We shadowed a DJ all day. She showed us the ropes, and it was just like magic to me. And one of my favorite movies growing up was Broadcast News, so, with Holly Hunter and William Hurt. So yeah, I've just always really loved the subject of journalism, getting to tell stories, sharing information with people, and thinking about how to do it in a creative way that really holds people's interest.
So one of our favorite topics on this podcast is simply why San Diego State, why you ended up choosing San Diego State, and some of your best memories of what happened to you on campus. So why SDSU for you, Rebecca?
I chose San Diego State. I mean, full disclosure, actually, I came from UC Santa Barbara, where I was a communications major, and go Gauchos. I loved that school, and I had every intention of staying. However, studying communication at the time was just kind of like parallel to what I really wanted to do. And I really wanted to dive into journalism itself. And I'm from San Diego, and San Diego state had a strong journalism program. And, their newspaper was well respected, still is. Daily Aztec, shout out. KPBS is there on campus. It has, affords amazing opportunities for students. And I did get to take advantage of that. So, they had a strong internship program and they had some very well respected journalism professors. So overall, I just felt like that was a much better fit for me at the time based on what I wanted to do with my career.
I tell students all the time, you never know who you're going to meet who's going to change your life, whether it's a friend, whether it's a professor, a colleague, or whoever it might be. And I know that I'm really grateful for the different colleagues that I met as students at the Daily Aztec, at KCR. For you, whether it's a professor, whether it's a favorite class, whether it's a classmate, what are some of the moments you look back on and you go like, wow, that was just a really pivotal moment in being able to advance in your career?
Yeah. Two come to mind immediately. One thing that I learned actually in the journalism program, which I hadn't expected, was leadership, which I learned that by running for and getting the role of the president for the Society of Professional Journalists, San Diego State's chapter, which was, I believe, one of the largest at the time. But I learned from Joe Schneider. I believe he has since passed, but he was the kindest, smartest. I loved him. I learned a lot from him. He was a wonderful professor and he was very thoughtful, and he allowed me he really just wanted the club to flourish. And so, we held some panels and provided networking opportunities for students, and just being able to be entrusted with the role of president for the Society of Professional Journalists was a really great learning opportunity for me. The other big one was getting to work for Gloria Penner. She is also no longer with us, but she was a force in journalism and a force for women in journalism in San Diego. I got the opportunity. She chose me. I don't know how she chose me over all the other applications, but she chose me to work as her intern on These Days with Gloria Penner at KPBS. And it was a 2-hour daily news, public affairs, arts and culture, local politics, radio program on KPBS. And I learned trial by fire. Everything that I had learned in journalism, I got to put into practice on that program. And I had to really be on point. And Gloria ran a tight ship and I had to meet her standards. And my standards were raised because of her expectations. And I will always be thankful for the opportunity to work on that program.
All right, let's discuss some of the different programs that you've worked on throughout your career. And I want to start with true crime, because true crime is just this really popular genre that people love to read and watch and listen and be their own investigative journalists. But before we start talking about true crime, I want to talk about the ethics that are involved in producing true crime. So let's start there in terms of, this is a really popular thing that people really enjoy, but yet there was someone who passed away with these stories. So let's start with the ethics that you want to take into producing true crime.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this. So I've produced many, many true crime stories. I think it's very, very important for people to remember that it is not a quote genre. True crime is true. A crime was committed, and it's on television because it was big. It was big to the people who went through it, including the families of the perpetrator, the families of the victim or multiple victims, whatever the crime was. Whenever I talk with families first, when I reach out, I tell them, if they are open to talking with me, the families of the victims and the families of the perpetrator, first, the families of the victims, we know that this really happened to you. We know that this changed your life and the lives of countless others forever. And I'm so sorry for your loss. we are so sorry for your loss as a program. I never refer to the project as a show, because a show implies that it's entertainment. And while I understand that people look at that true crime as a show and entertainment, it's, again, real people. It's real life. It really happened to them. And I think it's important for producers, when they are reaching out and communicating with families, to, behind the scenes, don't refer to them as talent. I've heard that a lot. They aren't talent. They're humans, and they are not trained camera performers. They're just people. And they're being vulnerable, and they're sharing their story. So treat them with care, extend much respect, be honest, do not make promises that you are not going to keep, and follow through on your word with these families that are trusting you with their story. Also, another thing that I always try to do, and I don't know if this will even make the podcast, I know that a lot of production companies like to not offer families compensation, financial compensation. There's a very fine line, and you can offer a family financial compensation for photographs, for archival that they may provide. So you're not necessarily paying for their story. But, true crime is not hard news. And I think production companies often use that rule in order to save money. And these families are making these networks and these production companies millions upon millions of dollars over many years, because the contracts that the families are signing are in perpetuity, forever and always, amen, in all universes. So I try my best to at least get the family some archival, like some money for photographs that they can provide, or other memorabilia that they might be able to share, so that they can at least get some kind of financial restitution for this story that they are being vulnerable and sharing. I just think, like, in the end, it's very important to remember that these people are real people. They have a lot of loss. They're very traumatized, no matter how much time has gone by. And you always want to treat the family with the most respect. Like, whoever in the world that you revere the most, picture that person in your mind. Treat that family with even more respect than you would treat that person, because they deserve it. I hope that this is making sense.
Yes, it's making sense. And I'm glad that you brought up the part about compensation, because it's something I had not thought about. And I think it's an important thing for people to understand. You mentioned something about when you first contact families. So I've written one true crime book, and I remember thinking, like, okay, I want to contact the family of the victim, the mom of the victim. And I remember, like, okay, I had the phone number, and I'm like getting ready to dial, and my hands are shaking. I'm like, am I really going to just cold call this person out of the blue and say, hi, I'm a reporter. I want to write a book about what happened to your daughter. Can we talk? And I didn't want to just knock on the door and do that either. And I remember just thinking, how do I even want to go about doing this? And I decided to write an old-fashioned letter. I actually typed it up, but I typed up a letter to explain who I was, and I put it in the mail so that it would arrive, so that when the mom went to the mailbox and got the mail, she could read what I wrote in detail. She could process, she could think about it, she could exhale, and here's my phone number if she wants to call me. And as it turned out, immediately she read it and she called me. What do you do in order to first contact families to explain, hey, I know this terrible thing happened to you, and I would like to talk with you about it? How do you go about it?
Well, first, I read everything I can about the case so that I can understand more fully what the situation is, who's been speaking to the press, who's been the voice for the family, who's been the most comfortable talking to the media. What happened? Did a child pass away? Then am I calling the mom, or am I calling someone adjacent to the mom? Probably someone adjacent to the mom, if that person has been speaking out in the media. But if the mom has been speaking to the media the most, then I call the mom. I look for the voices who have been quoted the most in the media first. And I usually try to gravitate toward those people to talk with first. So yeah, I get a strong understanding as best as I can of the case. Two, I look to see who has spoken with the media the most. And then when I reach out, okay, so I'll use an example. I've covered, there's a story, a girl named Danielle. She was murdered by a boy and a classmate. So yeah, I reached out to, I think, the sister of the mom, and because she had been quoted in the media, and she was my in to everyone else. But I first established a trust relationship with her, and I first gave them a phone call. I didn't hear back, so I always let it breathe, and I call back again another time, or if I've called a few times and I still haven't gotten a call, but the network is very keen on trying to tell the story of this case, then I will, like you just said, I'll write a letter. I'll either, type it up, or sometimes I will handwrite it depending on the story, the person that I'm trying to reach. And in that letter, I will say, like what you just said, I know this really happened to you. I'm reaching out just to see if you might be open to sharing your story with us. And, when I talk to them at first and I'm trying to gauge whether they're open, I'll say, I'm just looking for an over the phone, off the record chat so I can explain more about where I'm calling from and why. And, I'll tell them I'm with a series. I'll always say series. I won't say show. And, I'll really just try to approach with as much respect as possible.
I know that there's a lot of students. I was on this panel discussion a couple of months ago, and there's a student who was really interested in true crime. And I think that all of these things are important to understand how you go about actually working on something like this. Let's talk about the case of Billy Allen. Tell us who is Billy Allen and how you came to work on his story.
So I was a producer on a series called Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen, which I think is now called True Crime News. They've rebooted it. I was on that for 3 years full time, and I was turning over a lot of stories, producing a lot. And then I met someone in the bullpen one day who was just walking by my desk and mentioned his name, Billy's name, and said, "Hey, I know someone. Maybe it's a case you'd want to look into. Maybe it's somebody you'd want to get to know." And Billy was in prison, is still in prison, in federal prison for murder of a bank security guard and bank robbery. And so I reached out to Billy by mail, and we started talking, and then we talked on the phone. And then I got to know more about his case. He sent me, his sister sent me his entire case file, all the appeals, everything. And I spoke with Billy's attorney, his federal defense attorney, and we started talking, and I learned the details about the case. And ultimately what I learned is he didn't do it. He was victim of a very, very not unusual narrative, which, young Black man who was, mistakenly identified. He hadn't been involved with, he was not living a life of crime at the time or ever, but he trusted, when he was arrested, he trusted the cops who told him, "Oh, just come with us. And if you can give us some DNA, if it comes back negative, we'll let you go, no problem." And he's like, "Great, I'll be home for dinner." And he never went home again. There's lots in that case to talk about, but the bottom line is I met him when I was working on Crime Watch Daily, and he's a prolific artist. He sent me a piece of artwork from prison. It's stunning. He's so talented. I actually had it on the wall in my office at Crime Watch Daily for a long time. And so I kept communicating with Bill, and I ended up getting connected with two other filmmakers who were in New York at the time. The three of us, we found someone who used to shoot for CNN who offered to shoot for free for us. And the four of us all got together and met for the first time in St. Louis. We got an Airbnb and we shot a documentary in a week, most of it. And then a few months later, we shot again in November. There was an event in Washington, D.C. in front of the White House for Bill that we also filmed. And so our documentary came out this year. It's a private link, but yeah, we've known Bill. Sorry, I'm talking a lot more than you just asked, but I met Bill at Crime Watch Daily, and then I've been over the years, in the last 5 years, working toward making a short documentary, which was just completed this year and now has been submitted with his clemency package this year to Biden. He is requesting a pardon from the president. And so he's hoping that our short doc will help convince the president of his innocence.
So, Rebecca, when it comes to a story like this, we think ourselves as journalists, and we're objective and we're independent and we have a story to tell, and then we move on to the next story. But this is clearly something that just is an extremely lengthy story that you've been working on. And so give us your philosophy in terms of, you're not quite a crusader here, but you're kind of a crusader here in terms of, you find this story, you realize that something is not right, and just the process of you and the people working together to try to basically bring justice for Billy.
So I've always felt the strong need to be a voice for the voiceless. I think that's what's drawn me to journalism my whole life. To right a wrong, not that I want to swoop in and save everyone, but I feel like I'm here to try and help do good with storytelling. And meeting Bill and learning about his story, I really felt like I have this information and now I have two choices. I can do nothing with it, or I can do something with it. And obviously I can't do nothing with it. So then the next question is, what is that something that I do with it? And so I wasn't sure, but in meeting my fellow filmmakers, Marita Cardone and Billy Melissa Rogan, it just became very clear that, I knew that Bill needed a voice. You aren't allowed, they don't permit cameras in federal prison, or any kind of recording devices. So Bill has been in there for over 25 years now. And I really felt like we needed to give him a voice. And then suddenly, in a few years after I met Bill, Georgetown University's got this program, this undergraduate program called Making an Exoneree, run by two amazing professors who created the program. And these students were presented with several cases they could choose from. Many cases, actually, and they chose Billy's case to examine, look at the facts of the case and try and tell the story and unpack why he is where he is and why he shouldn't be where he is. So because they were free law students and they were with attorneys, they were allowed to go into federal prison with a camera and record Bill in prison for the first time, give him a voice and a face, and to help people connect with him and care about his story. Because, once you go behind bars, you disappear and people have lives, they get busy. There's a lot of other things that are vying for their attention. So it's, you have to make people pay attention in order for there to be change. And now we have Bill's face and his voice on camera, thanks to this program at Georgetown and these undergraduate students. And they made their own documentary with some archival footage from the local news station. And that professors and the students from that program they connected with us and they agreed to allow us access to their content and to incorporate their content in with what we were going to make. And we ultimately made it a short documentary because Bill is running out of time and Trump is taking office in January, and Trump has a track record. He has a deadly track record with federal inmates. His last administration, he ordered the execution of 13 people in federal prison, which was unprecedented. And he did it during the last lame duck days of his presidency, just to make a point. So, and he's vowed that he will do it again as soon as he takes office. So we know that, Bill's out of appeals. This pardon is the only thing left that Bill has to save his life. So that's why we made the short doc. We turned it into short doc so that he could submit it with his clemency package to Biden. We just felt like, yeah, it's our job to give Bill the strongest voice and make his face as known as possible. He's the face of innocence. So that's been our journey in telling Bill's story. And I hope that I have answered your question somehow in the middle of all this storytelling.
You most certainly have, Rebecca. And the thing that just came to my mind is just how heavy these topics are and how intense they are. And so I kind of want to transition to something that's a little bit lighter for our conversation, but I also want to give you the opportunity to kind of explain to those who want to pursue something like this or enjoy reading about these types of stories, the toll that it does take on the filmmakers when you're working on something that is this emotional.
Yeah. It's hard. I'm not going to lie. I worked on Investigation Discovery and People Magazine Investigates. I have, Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen, for years and years on telling the stories of these cases of these people who have been through horrible things and recounting just the saddest stories, the saddest information, so much trauma. And it does take a toll. I think it's really important to have some other outlet for yourself. When I was at Crime Watch Daily, sometimes I would go home at night and just play the guitar for a while, just do something completely checking out entirely. It's, I think, good to talk about, the things that you're experiencing and feeling. If you have some kind of person that you trust that you can do that with, some mental health professional, maybe. If you journal personally, that is really helpful. And I think it's good too that if you recognize that it's too much for you, that's okay. You don't have to just stay in a narrow lane. Like, journalism is so wide. You can go a different direction, and that's okay. You can take a break and go a different direction. I think it's just really good to pay attention to your needs, and but self-care, it's kind of overused, but it's good to take care of yourself and get exercise, make sure you get plenty of sleep, make sure that you're ready, and also make sure that you're equipped to be there for these interviews that you're doing with these people, that if you are going to produce these stories, that you're able to be fully present for these families. And also, I just want to say that one thing that helps me, whenever I take on a story to produce, I always try to remember that it's a gift in that I'm able to help these people share their story to go to, if it's something that they want to do. And I don't pressure families. Even if a network says we have to have the story, if a family says I can't do it, I'm absolutely not going to pressure them to tell the story they don't want to tell. And they'll say, I'm not talking to you. But if a family does extend the grace to you and bring you in and trust you with their story, they're trusting you with their story. And you are being given the opportunity to help them through the process of telling this very difficult thing. And you are the gift of your ears and the gift of your heart in just providing them a space to be listened to and be understood when they're talking about this really difficult thing. I try to remember that so that it helps me feel more like I really am helping. I'm asking questions that are eliciting responses that are helping them process. If they need to do that, they're processing things that need to be processed and they're not keeping them down. And that goes to also, I would say, for people in law enforcement, and district attorneys, like these people all see, and defense attorneys, they're like, all of these people, they see terrible things and they experience these cases. They see the crime scene photos. They go to the crime scenes. They spend countless hours, days, weeks, years, months, whatever, on these cases. And so, yeah, I just always try to frame each story that I'm trying to tell in a way that I see that I'm helping in some way. And that helps me navigate my own feelings about what I'm hearing, reading, and seeing and experiencing through the process of telling these stories.
There's something I'm going to add to what Rebecca said, and they're going to move on to another thing that she worked on. So again, when I wrote one true crime book, and I'll never forget how often I would say to somebody at the end of an interview, "Thank you, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for talking to me." And the quantity of times that somebody said, "Thank you for listening," and I realized how few people had gone through any type of therapy who had really talked it through. And I started to realize the more and more that it occurred, just how often I became their quasi-therapist because they hadn't talked about it. They had kept it suppressed. And so then when they did share it, that made me feel better because I felt like I was invading their space, invading their trauma. And I think, like what Rebecca said, if you do it with compassion, that it helps, that it helped them. Let's discuss another thing that you did that's not quite as intense, and that is the story "Who Do You Think You Are?" where celebrities traced their ancestry. Tell us about this project and some of just the behind the scenes things that go into helping produce this story.
I love that job because I love history, and initially learning where the family thought they came from and then going back into documents and we were partnered with Ancestry, the company Ancestry. We worked with a professional genealogist or many, and the company Ancestry. And through the documents, through historical documents, we would trace back and back and back to either debunk or confirm what the family knew about their history. And through newspaper articles and ship manifests and census records, federal, state, local census records, tiny local newspapers, and then, hiring, hyper local archivists, both here in the States and abroad, in these tiny English towns. Or, I helped build a family tree for Rosie O'Donnell, for Gwyneth Paltrow, and for Reba McEntire. And it was so special to me to be able to have the privilege of being paid to research history of these people and helping them understand where they come from, tracing their family history all the way back to, pre-1700. Reba McEntire, we traced her all the way back to this one young boy who came over as an indentured servant, with nothing, terrified, and learning what that meant, like contextualizing history, not just saying, "Oh, you came from John Smith, who was 10, who came over from England, and then he lived until this age, and then he bought these things." No, it was, what does it mean to be an indentured servant at age 10? How many of those kids actually survived, and what were the odds? I mean, they were the deck was stacked against this tiny little boy, who was all alone in the world, but he kept at it, and he survived. And it's just, these are amazing stories. Loved and cherished so much being able to work on a project that in the end, each of these families has this treasured record of where they came from based on historical fact. Like these documents prove this history. It's something that will survive in their families if they decide to keep them. I would make a photo album. I would make this huge album for the family of all the documents that we found at the end, just because I wanted them to have it so that they could preserve it for their children and their children and their children. And I mean, I really hope that they hold on to those things because they are just priceless. I just loved it. I think it's a great project, and I love helping people understand. It's storytelling, but it's using the facts to tell the story of someone's life and preserving it so that we can just, I don't know, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Like it's also just learning where you come from, where you came from. It can contextualize where you are now, and it can, maybe, help navigate the direction that you go in the future. Maybe not. I don't know. But I love that project. And I also separately worked years later as a senior producer on another series for NBC called Roots Less Traveled, which also told the story of a Japanese American family. And it was a brother, sister, and they really wanted to know where they came from. And so very similar project. The show was, and I call it a show because it's a show, but it was aimed toward, it was aired Saturday mornings. It was geared toward middle schoolers, freshmen in high school. And it helped get kids excited about history and storytelling and travel. And I just think all of that is so important in informing and making a whole human, understanding where each of us comes from and where we come from. And I loved it.
The note that I wrote down as Rebecca was telling that was attention to detail, and just the importance of attention to detail as journalists, as storytellers, especially when you're tracing someone's ancestry back and back and back and back, and just attention to detail. Okay, I want to talk to you about one other project that you've worked on before we wrap up this week's podcast, and that is the story of Amanda Riley. She pretended that she had cancer. She swindled hundreds of thousands of dollars from people. Give us you can actually start wherever you want to go in terms of this story, how you started to work on it, and some of the most important lessons of working behind the scenes on the story of Amanda Riley.
The person responsible for the entire investigation, her name is Nancy Moscatello. She is a force. And she was my boss at Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen. And so she just, she brought me along, like just on Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen. She allowed me to be part of that investigation into Amanda Riley. And so Amanda Riley was someone who was pretending to have cancer. She was a young mom. She was pretending to have cancer, and she was scamming people out of lots and lots and lots of money and gifts. It was very sneaky the way that she was getting away with it. It was diabolical. The level of lying, and it was not even diabolical, but more like pathological. Anyway, I was allowed to work on this investigation. I traveled up to San Jose at one point. I flew up from Los Angeles. I went with a camera operator, and we kind of did a little tiny sting where we pretended we went to a light the night cancer event where Amanda was pretending to have cancer. And she was, supporting, people, supporting her own cause. And we got her on camera showing us her cape, like she was a superhero beating cancer. It was quite something. I got her on camera talking about how she had stage 4 cancer, and she absolutely did not. It's really incredible the level of investigation, the investigative work that was done into that case by Nancy Moscatello, by the federal investigators who ultimately brought Amanda down. But it was a multi-year investigation, and Amanda never thought she would get caught. She truly thought she would get away with this. It's inspiring to learn from Nancy Moscatello the importance of detailed investigation, record keeping. Nancy was constant. She was always pushing, just continue to push and push and push. It would seem like it would seem like we were never going to get anywhere because of HIPAA laws. Amanda would go and she would pose in a hospital. She'd sneak into a hospital room and she'd put on some like a mask or like she'd hook herself up to something and take a few photographs. And it's so difficult to prove that someone doesn't have cancer. So Nancy had to find ways to investigate this case, and ultimately the money trail was what brought Amanda down. Amanda's serving time now in federal prison for her crimes. Were it not for the dogged, unrelenting investigative work of Nancy Moscatello and the way that she directed her researchers, her team, her producers, that would not be the case. And Amanda would probably still be scamming people out of money today. She did a lot of damage. I think a lot of people were, their trust was destroyed. And so there's a lot of healing that's required now, I think, probably from Amanda's case, and many people that she took money from in this, this mega church that she went to, and a lot of people who gave her money.
I feel like I could talk to Rebecca for a long time about all the different cases that she's worked on. But what I like about the conversation for this week's podcast is that we have three different types of stories. We have a true crime of someone who was wrongfully convicted. We have the fun, detailed ancestry. And then we also have someone who committed a crime. There wasn't a death that was involved, but there was lots of money and trust that was betrayed. And I think it shows all the different types of work that journalists do that may not be in a newspaper or on the nightly news, but it's all the different types of investigative journalistic work. And so I really liked the conversation and the three different types of stories that you've worked on. We're going to wrap things up here momentarily, but if there's anything else that you would like to add, impart, something I should have asked that didn't before we wrap things up, whether it's advice for a student who wants to be involved in these types of things, whether it's someone who just enjoys watching these things, I'll leave the floor open to you, Rebecca, in terms of just final thoughts about working on these types of projects.
In terms of working on these types of projects with respect to true crime, always remember these are real people, whether they are law enforcement agents, legal professionals, investigators of any kind, federal, state, local, family members of victims, family members of the accused, whoever it is that you're trying to talk with, or if they are convicted and maybe they are guilty or maybe they are innocent, no matter what, these are all real people who have been through really traumatic things. And they are not, quote, talent, as a network might refer to them. And it's not a show. At least when you're talking to them, it's not a show. When it goes on television and it has commercials and graphics and all that, yeah, it's a show on television. But when you're talking with them, it's a project. It's a series. There's a language of respect that you need to use when you're talking with these people. And there's a level of compassion and thoughtfulness and care that is required in order to be worthy of telling that story and in order to give that story its best. If you aren't listening and you aren't caring, you aren't going to be able to tell the best possible version of that story. You aren't going to be able to give that story the life that it really needs to be given. And you want to give every story 100%. So give it 100% of your heart. That's what I would say. And then in terms of for students who are trying to decide what they want to do, I know you didn't ask this, but I wanted to just say this anyway. There's a lot of options out there. And sometimes it can seem like you don't know which direction you want to go and you're not sure what the best path is to follow. And I really love this writer. She also has a podcast. Her name is Glennon Doyle. And she says, just if you're trying to decide which direction to go, think about a direction as an option and how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel warm or cold? If you feel warm about that decision, keep going that direction. And if you don't, turn another way. Because there are infinite number of choices that you can take in the world, and you can get distracted by doing too many things. But I would also say San Diego State offers so many opportunities, so many internships, local television, national. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And I would say if you are open to it, take advantage of as many opportunities as you possibly can, because people want to share their experience with you. The more people you have who are willing to talk with you and share their experience, the more contacts you have. And I don't mean that in a cheesy way. I don't mean that in an underhanded way. I mean, literally, in this business, contacts are a huge part of how you are able to navigate a story, your career in any business. Contacts are key. So try to get in touch with as many people as you can, reach out to as many people as you can, ask as many questions as you can. Don't be afraid. There's no such thing as a dumb question. There's only opportunities for growth when you're an undergraduate journalism student at San Diego State.
Well, that is outstanding advice. And I love the phrase, give it 100% of your heart. Okay, Rebecca, we close things out by bragging about another San Diego State alum who has made us proud. And so the floor is yours. Who else do you want to give a shout out to who is making us proud?
Can I say two?
Yes, of course.
Okay. One, her name is Sunny C. Gold. She was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Aztec when I was there. When we finished, she started a project. She wanted to be a magazine editor. And she started an organization called ED 2010. And it was basically editors. The goal was to be an editor by 2010 at a magazine in New York. And she did it. This was despite 9/11, by the way. She was there for that in the middle of all that. I know she's written at least one book, but I Sunny C. Gold, and she's a really talented writer, and she's tenacious, and I sing her praises as an Aztec alum. And also my sister, Christine Waer, is an attorney in New York City. She was actually an English grad from San Diego State, graduated undergrad English literature, I think. Anyway, she's done a lot in New York City. She's done a lot with helping children in abuse cases in New York City. And she's done a lot to help mothers and families and children in New York City navigate some difficult situations. Yeah, San Diego State equips and empowers students to do great things.
All right, Rebecca, great things were said and lessons learned throughout this podcast. Thank you so much for being generous with your time and sharing these stories, which are not always the easiest to tell, but I know that I enjoyed it. I know our audience will. So thank you for being a guest on the Where You At podcast.
Thank you so much for your time and for what you do, Josh.
Once again, that was Rebecca Waer. My name is Josh Suchon. I'm the host of the Where You At podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.